The summer my mother remarried, the house learned how to breathe differently. It exhaled in long, tired creaks after sunset, as if it, too, needed time to accept the new shape of our lives. The old wooden floors complained under unfamiliar footsteps. Doors hesitated before closing. Even the ceiling fan in my room spun with a soft, uneven whine, like it was unsure which rhythm to follow. That was the summer Ethan moved in. My stepbrother by law. A word that felt too clean, too official, for what it would come to mean. The mornings were quiet, too quiet. Sunlight filtered through thin curtains, dust floating like suspended thoughts. I'd wake to the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen and the low murmur of my mother laughing, lighter than I'd heard in years. Her happiness felt earned, and I told myself I wanted to protect it. Needed to. Ethan usually woke later. I'd hear his door open down the hall, the soft thud of bare feet against the floor, the pause before he cleared his throat like he was preparing to be someone else for the day. Sometimes our eyes met in the hallway, just for a second. Long enough to notice the way his hair curled at the nape of his neck. Long enough for something unspoken to pass between us. Then we'd look away. Routine became our camouflage. Breakfast at 8. Polite smiles. Careful distance at the table. 4 chairs, 4 people, and a space between us that felt louder than conversation. Our parents talked about renovations, bills, weekend plans. Ethan nodded. I listened. Neither of us said much. Inside, I was constantly narrating myself. Don't stare. Don't imagine. He's family now. The house sat at the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees that blocked the streetlights at night. After dark, shadows pulled in the corners of rooms. Sounds carried, footsteps, water pipes, the faint buzz of a phone vibrating through a wall. Some nights, I thought I heard someone standing outside my door. Breathing, waiting. I never opened it. Ethan's presence unsettled me in ways I didn't have language for yet. It wasn't just attraction. If I was honest, I'd known that feeling for years. It was the danger of it. The way his existence challenged the rules I'd built to survive. The way his laugh, low, unexpected, slipped under my skin and stayed there. Once, I came home later than usual and noticed his room was empty. Door open, lights off, bed untouched. A strange panic flared in my chest. I stood there longer than I should have, staring into the quiet space, wondering why his absence felt heavier than his presence. Wondering what it said about me that I noticed at all. That night, a floorboard creaked outside my room. Not passing by, stopping. I held my breath, heart pounding, mind racing with questions I was afraid to answer. Was it just the house settling again? Or was this the moment everything was about to change? Morning light crept in the same way every day, pale and forgiving. The clink of mugs. The hum of the refrigerator. My stepfather's cough as he read the news. My mother's voice, steady and warm, calling us boys like nothing had changed, like everything hadn't. Ethan sat across from me most mornings, one leg hooked around the chair rung, fingers wrapped loosely around his cup. He never drank all of it. I noticed that. I noticed everything, and then hated myself for it. We barely spoke, not because we didn't have things to say, but because saying them felt dangerous. I told myself the tension was temporary. That it was just the awkwardness of blending families. 2 strangers forced into shared hallways and shared silences. That the quick glances and the careful distance would fade with time. They didn't. If anything, they sharpened. Afternoons were worse. Our parents worked late, leaving the house hollow and echoing. Sunlight slanted through the windows, turning dust into something almost alive. I'd sit on the couch pretending to read, listening for Ethan's footsteps upstairs. Sometimes he'd stay in his room for hours. Sometimes he wouldn't come home at all. Those were the days that unsettled me the most. I'd check the clock without meaning to. Stand at the window. Convince myself I didn't care. He's not your responsibility. He's not your. The thought never finished. One evening, a storm rolled in unexpectedly. The sky darkened early, thunder rattling the windows. Rain drummed against the roof, steady and insistent. The power flickered once, twice, then steadied again. Ethan still wasn't home. My mother paced the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. It's probably dead, she said, forcing a laugh. He's probably with friends. Friends. The word echoed strangely. I retreated to my room, heart tight for reasons I couldn't explain. The storm amplified every sound, the house groaning, water rushing through pipes, something tapping against the siding like fingernails. When the front door finally opened, I felt it more than heard it. I stepped into the hallway just as Ethan shrugged off his jacket. His hair was damp, eyes darkened by the rain. For a second, we just stood there, frozen in the low light. "You okay?" I asked. The question slipped out before I could stop it. He hesitated, just a beat too long. "Yeah," he said, just. Lost track of time. Something in his voice didn't settle right. That night, sleep came in fragments. Thunder rolled overhead, close enough to shake the walls. At some point, I heard movement, soft, deliberate steps outside my door. A pause. The faintest sound of fabric brushing wood. I sat up in bed, pulse roaring in my ears. "Ethan," I whispered, barely louder than the rain. Silence. In the morning, neither of us mentioned it. Days blurred together. We began crossing paths more often, accidentally, supposedly. In the kitchen, on the stairs, outside, taking out the trash at the same time. Each encounter was brief, polite, loaded. Once, our hands brushed reaching for the same glass. The shock of it shot straight through me. He pulled back immediately, jaw tight, eyes flicking toward the hallway as if someone might appear. Neither of us spoke, but the space he left behind felt charged, like the air before lightning. I started avoiding mirrors, avoiding my own thoughts, because every time I let myself be honest, even for a second, the truth was there, undeniable and terrifying. This wasn't just curiosity. This wasn't confusion. This was longing, and it had a face, a voice, a room down the hall. The house began to feel smaller. Walls closing in, secrets pressed into every corner. I caught Ethan watching me once, from the top of the stairs, expression unreadable. When our eyes met, he turned away too quickly. Guilt followed me everywhere. At dinner, in my room, even in dreams I woke from breathless and ashamed. I reminded myself of the rules. Of family, of the way my mother smiled now, lighter than before. I told myself I would never cross that line. Then came the night everything tilted. Our parents left town for the weekend, an anniversary trip they'd planned months ago. The house felt different the moment their car disappeared down the street. Too quiet, too open. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a space that no longer had witnesses. Dinner was simple. Takeout eaten at opposite ends of the table. The TV murmured in the background, a laugh track that felt out of place. Ethan barely touched his food. "You don't have to stay up here," he said suddenly. "I mean, if you want to go out." I shook my head. "I'm good." Another pause. "Me too," he said, softly. Later, the power went out. Just like that. 1 second light, the next, darkness. "Seriously," Ethan muttered from the living room. I grabbed my phone, using the dim glow to navigate the hallway. The storm had returned without warning, rain lashing the windows. Wind howled through the trees, branches scraping against the house. "Breaker might have tripped," I said. We met at the fuse box in the basement, our phone lights cutting through the shadows. The air down there was cool and damp, the ceiling low enough to make me hunch. Ethan stood too close. I could feel his warmth. Smell the faint trace of soap and rain. "Did you hear that?" he asked. A sound echoed from upstairs, a thud, then a creak. Not the storm, something else. My stomach tightened. Probably the wind, but we both knew it wasn't. The lights flickered back on suddenly, startling us both. For a moment, everything was frozen, his face inches from mine, eyes searching, breathing uneven. Time stretched. I became acutely aware of my heartbeat, of the fact that no one else was home, of how easily this moment could tip into something irreversible. Ethan stepped back first. "Good night," he said, voice strained. I watched him climb the stairs, every step heavy with what we weren't saying. I stood alone in the basement long after, surrounded by humming electricity and unanswered questions. That night, I didn't lock my door. I lay awake listening, to the storm, to the house, to the possibility of footsteps that never came. Or maybe they did, and I was too afraid to move. because somewhere between guilt and desire, between law and longing, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. Whatever was growing between us had already crossed a line. The only question left was how far it was willing to go. The house was wrapped in silence so complete it rang in my ears. The storm had passed, leaving the air thick and damp, windows fogged like the world outside was holding its breath. Every sound carried, my own footsteps, the soft click of a light switch, the distant ticking of the hallway clock. Ethan hadn't gone to his room. I noticed it when I passed his door and found it open, lights off, bed untouched. A strange unease crawled up my spine. That same feeling again, the one I refused to name. Don't look for him. I looked anyway. He was in the kitchen, standing by the sink, staring out into the dark backyard. One light above the stove cast his shadow long across the floor, stretching toward me like it knew something I didn't. "You're still up," I said. He flinched slightly before turning around. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." Neither could I. We stood there, a careful distance between us, the unspoken pressing in from all sides. The house felt different without our parents, like the rules had loosened, just enough to let something dangerous breathe. "Do you ever feel like this place is too quiet?" he asked. I swallowed. "All the time." He nodded, as if that confirmed something. The silence stretched. I became painfully aware of my hands, what they were doing, where they rested. Of my heartbeat, loud and uneven. Of the fact that we were alone in a way we hadn't been before. "I heard you last night," Ethan said suddenly. My chest tightened. "Heard me? Talking? In your sleep?" His eyes flicked up to mine, then away. "You said my name." The room tilted. I don't remember that," I said, too quickly. "I know," he replied. I wasn't sure if I should say anything. Guilt surged hot and sharp. "This is wrong." The word echoed uselessly. I opened my mouth to apologize, to laugh it off, to retreat into safety, but nothing came out. Instead, I asked, "Why were you outside my door?" He froze. For a long moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. The clock ticked. Somewhere, a pipe knocked softly. "I don't know," he said finally. "I just walked there." My breath caught. And then I realized I shouldn't be," he said. "So I left." The honesty in his voice undid me more than any lie could have. We were standing closer now. I didn't remember moving, only the sudden awareness of him, his heat, the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched like he was holding something back. "This can't happen," I whispered. "I know," he said immediately. The agreement felt hollow. "Your mom," he added. "My dad." "I know. We're family." The word landed between us like a challenge. I laughed softly, without humor. "Does it feel like that to you?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low. "Careful." "No." The admission cracked something open. I should have stepped back. Should have ended it there. Instead, I stayed exactly where I was, trapped between relief and terror. "You don't get to say that," I said, my voice shaking. "You don't get to make this harder." "I didn't mean to," he replied. "I swear." I tried to ignore it. "Then why are you still here?" The question hung in the air, heavy and electric. Ethan's eyes searched mine, like he was looking for permission, or absolution. "Because every time I walk away," he said, "it feels worse." My heart pounded so hard I was sure he could hear it. The kitchen light flickered once, briefly dimming, then steadied again. The sound made us both jump. It felt like a warning. Or a countdown. "Say it," he murmured. "Say what?" "That you feel it too." I shook my head, panic surging. "I can't." "Then tell me to leave," he said. "Tell me to go to my room and lock your door." I opened my mouth. No sound came out. His breath hitched. "That's what I thought." He took a step closer. "Not touching. Not yet." The space between us felt louder than a shout. "This is wrong," I said again, weaker now. "I know," he said. "But it's real." Something in his voice, raw, almost pleading, undid the last of my defenses. I hated myself for it. For the way my body responded before my mind could catch up. For the way fear tangled with desire until I couldn't tell them apart. "Ethan," I whispered. He stopped. Completely still. "Tell me to stop." I searched his face, every familiar line, every uncertainty reflected back at me. In that moment, I saw it clearly. He was just as lost as I was. Just as scared, just as willing to fall. I didn't tell him to stop. Instead, I reached out, hesitantly, like touching fire, and brushed my fingers against his wrist. The contact was brief, devastating. He sucked in a breath, eyes darkening. Neither of us moved, as if breaking the moment would shatter something fragile and irreversible. Footsteps creaked upstairs. We froze. Every nerve in my body screamed. The house seemed to hold its breath with us. The sound passed, settling wood, nothing more, but the damage was done. Reality crashed back in, sharp and merciless. Ethan pulled away, hand running through his hair. "This is insane," he said, voice rough. "We're playing with something we can't undo." "I know," I said, throat tight. He looked at me one last time, really looked at me. There was something in his expression I'd never seen before. Regret, want, and a question he didn't dare ask. Then he turned and walked away. I stood alone in the kitchen, fingers still tingling where he'd touched me, heart in ruins. Upstairs, his door closed softly. Not slammed, not locked. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the door across the hall. The house creaked and sighed around us, settling into secrets it would never tell. I didn't know what scared me more. That we'd almost crossed the line. Or that some part of me wished we had. Morning came softly, like it was afraid of what it might wake. Sunlight crept through the blinds in thin, cautious lines, stopping short of my bed. The house was quiet again, but not calm. It carried the echo of last night in every corner, like a breath held too long. I hadn't slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt it again, the brush of his wrist against my fingers, the way the world narrowed to that single point of contact. Not a kiss, not a confession, something worse, something unfinished. I lay there listening for movement, for his door, for footsteps, nothing. When I finally forced myself up, the hallway felt longer than usual. His door was closed now. Not locked, just closed. The difference mattered more than it should have. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled faintly of coffee, burnt. Ethan had been up before me. The mug sat in the sink, untouched except for a single lip mark on the rim. A detail so intimate it made my chest ache. He wasn't there. I told myself it was a relief. The day dragged. I moved through it like a ghost, replaying every word, every pause. Guilt settled heavy in my stomach, followed closely by resentment, at myself, at the situation, at the fact that wanting him had become something I carried like a bruise. By afternoon, the silence felt deliberate. I found him in the garage, sitting on the hood of his car, staring at nothing. The light slanted in through the open door, dust floating between us like static. "Hey," I said. He looked up slowly. His eyes were tired, guarded. "Hey." We stood there, awkward and careful, like strangers rehearsing familiarity. "I'm sorry about last night," I said, the words tasting rehearsed and inadequate. He nodded once. "Me too." Another pause. "Longer this time. It shouldn't have happened," I added. "I know. But," he raised a hand gently. Not angry, not dismissive, just tired. "Let's not," he said. "Please." That hurt more than I expected. We existed like that for the rest of the day, circling each other without collision. Polite, distant, almost normal. And somehow, that felt worse than the tension had. Dinner was quiet. The TV stayed off. Outside, cicadas hummed, relentless. Our parents wouldn't be back until the next morning. The knowledge pressed down on me, heavy with what-ifs. That night, I heard his door open. Then close. Then open again. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths that refused to steady. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Stopped. Not at my door. At the bathroom. The light flicked on, spilling a thin line beneath my doorframe. Water ran. Stopped. Silence returned. Then, knuckles. Soft. Uncertain. Not on my door. On the wall between our rooms. Once. A pause. Twice. My heart slammed against my ribs. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The knock wasn't loud enough to be accidental. It felt like a question asked without words. I waited. So did he. The silence stretched until it hurt. Finally, footsteps retreated. His door closed again, slower this time. I sat up in the dark, hands shaking, flooded with a mix of relief and regret so sharp it almost made me laugh. That was the moment, I realized, the moment where things could have tipped in either direction. And we had both chosen nothing. In the morning, our parents came home full of stories and smiles. The house brightened with their presence, like a spell broken. Ethan laughed at his dad's jokes. My mother hugged us both. We played our parts perfectly. But sometimes, across the dinner table, our eyes met. Just for a second, long enough to acknowledge the thing we were pretending didn't exist. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to the house settle around us. Familiar creaks, familiar sighs. Somewhere down the hall, Ethan turned off his light. I didn't know if the distance between us was growing, or if it was only tightening, quietly, waiting for the next mistake. After that weekend, something fundamental shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There were no confrontations, no confessions ripped open in the heat of emotion. The change lived in smaller things, in pauses that stretched too long, in conversations that stopped just short of honesty. In the way Ethan and I learned how to exist near each other without ever quite touching the truth. We became experts at restraint. At breakfast, we sat across from one another like always, but now every glance felt measured. Controlled. I noticed how carefully he avoided my eyes, how his laughter around our parents sounded just a little forced. When he brushed past me in the hallway, he kept space between us, like proximity itself had become dangerous. I told myself this was good, necessary, but the quiet hurt more than the tension ever had. At night, I replayed everything, not just what almost happened, but what didn't. The knock on the wall. The hesitation. The choice we'd both made to stay silent. I wondered if he lay awake too, staring at his ceiling, questioning whether restraint was courage or cowardice. Weeks passed. Life resumed its shape. School, work, chores, family dinners. From the outside, we looked like a success story, two families blending without friction. Inside, something smoldered. Once, my mother asked us to run an errand together. A short drive, 10 minutes, maybe. The car ride was suffocating. The radio played softly, some love song neither of us acknowledged. At a red light, Ethan glanced at me, quick, unguarded. The look said everything. Then the light changed, and it was gone. I started to wonder if this was how it would always be. A lifetime of almosts. Of unfinished moments buried under obligation and fear. I tried to convince myself that time would dull it, that distance, routine, normalcy would erase what never fully began. But some things don't fade. They wait. One night, months later, I came home late. The house was dark, our parents already asleep. As I climbed the stairs, I noticed his door was open. Light spilled into the hallway. He was sitting on his bed, phone in hand, expression unreadable. "Hey," he said quietly. My heart skipped. "Hey." Neither of us moved. "I'm thinking of moving out next year," he added, like it was casual. Like it hadn't just cracked something open in my chest. "Oh," I said. "Yeah, college, another city." I nodded, swallowing hard. "That makes sense." Silence settled between us again, familiar, heavy. "I thought you should know," he said. "Thanks." I turned to leave. "Wait," he said. I stopped, my back to him, pulse racing. I waited for more. An explanation. A goodbye. A confession. Something. Nothing came. "Good night," he said softly. "Good night." In my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall between us. The same wall he'd knocked on once. The same distance that had kept us safe, and trapped. I didn't know if him leaving would end this, or finally give it space to become something else. As the house settled into sleep, one question refused to let me rest. When the rules that kept us apart disappear, will what we buried stay buried, or come back louder than ever? The house they chose sat just outside the city, quiet in a way that felt intentional. Wide windows, pale walls, a place meant for fresh starts. On our first night there, rain pressed gently against the glass, blurring the world into soft streaks of light. Everything smelled like new paint and cardboard boxes. Temporary, adjustable. That was how I thought this would be. Temporary. My stepbrother, Ethan, arrived 2 days later with a single suitcase and a silence that felt practiced. He shook my hand like we were strangers at a formal event, his grip firm, his smile polite. Too polite. Guess we're family now, he said. I laughed, because that's what you do when something lands heavier than expected. Life settled quickly into routine. Mornings were quiet rituals, coffee brewing, news murmuring from the TV, my mother humming while she unpacked boxes that never seemed to empty. The house learned our habits fast, where the floor creaked, which doors stuck, which rooms stayed unused. Ethan took the bedroom across from mine. That wasn't planned. Or maybe it was. I never asked. We passed each other in the hallway like clockwork, brief nods, careful smiles. The distance between us stayed respectful, measured. I told myself I was relieved. That the tension I felt was just adjustment. Just nerves. Still, I noticed things. The way he lingered in doorways like he was deciding whether to stay or leave. The way his voice dropped when the house went quiet. The way his laughter surprised him, like it wasn't something he used often. At night, the house sounded different. Older. Every creak felt intentional. Every shadow stretched longer than it should. Sometimes I lay awake listening to footsteps that weren't there, or maybe were. I'd stare at the ceiling and catalog my thoughts like evidence. This is fine. This is normal. You're imagining things. The weather stayed strange that week. Heavy clouds during the day, sudden clear skies at night. The kind of unpredictability that makes you feel slightly off balance without knowing why. One evening, I realized Ethan hadn't come home. Dinner sat untouched. His phone went unanswered. My stepfather brushed it off. He's grown. Probably out late. But something in my chest tightened anyway. A reaction too strong for someone who was, by all logic, barely part of my life. When he finally returned, close to midnight, I was still awake. Our eyes met in the hallway. Hey, he said softly, like the word mattered. Hey. Nothing else passed between us, but something shifted. I felt it settle into the walls, into the air between breaths. Later, as I lay in bed, a sound broke the silence. A floorboard. Not outside. Inside the house. I held my breath, staring at the door across the hall. Wondering if this new life was already testing us. Or warning me of what was coming next.